Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again to doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be on a team that's called the We Believe Warriors. If you're not familiar with them, it's basically the Warriors from the 2007 playoffs and how they pulled off a huge upset. They were an 8 seed at 42 and 40, and they uh, beat the Mavericks, who were 67 and 15. Now, I actually already did a video on this, basically breaking down how the Warriors did this, but in this video, I'm actually going to be talking more about the basically the rise and fall of this Warriors team, and I think a lot of people think back to them and think like, why didn't they have a sustained run of successful years in the playoffs? And they actually, this sort of group of Baron Davis and these guys only made the playoffs in this season. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that this was like a one hit wonder sort of team. Today I'm basically going to be breaking down why that was the case and how they both built up into a good team and then fell down, and basically the rise and fall of the We Believe Warriors. So let's get into it. I think the first year that we really start with this is 2005 to 2006. This is a year where the Warriors are not a bad team anymore. They're decent. They're at 34 and 38 on the season, so they're not playoff contender, but they're not like bad either. They're in the late lottery. They have some good players. They've got Jason Richardson. He's basically leading the team, averaging 23 points per game on 45% from the field, shooting 38% from three. Um, then you've got Baron Davis, who they acquired. I think this was his first or second season with the team. He was averaging 18 points per game. He was only shooting 39% from the field, which is pretty bad. And then he was getting 9 assists a game along with the 18 points and 4 rebounds a game. Then you had Troy Murphy as another starter. He was averaging 14 points per game and 10 rebounds. Pretty decent. Mike Dunleavy also starting, averaging 12 points per game and 5 rebounds. And then you had Derek, Donald Foyle as your last starter, who was averaging 4 points a game and 6 rebounds. And then you had Derrick Rose, who actually started a few games, 36. He was kind of filling in for when Baron Davis was injured. And then you also had Mikhail Petrus, who was coming off the bench as a main guy, basically like the sixth man, and he was doing pretty decent, giving him 9 points a game. And then you had a rookie, Monte Ellis, who wasn't doing much. He was playing 18 minutes a night, but only scoring 7 points a game. But as you can see, yes, you have Baron Davis, but he arguably had one of his worst years in his prime. And then you have Jason Richardson, and really not much besides that. Derek Fisher was actually pretty good this year. He averaged 13 points per game, which is the highest of his career, but really as a whole, this team did not have much. Going on to the next season, this is when things got really good for the team overall. This is their best season. They were 42 and 40. This is the best of any of these years as far as success in the playoffs for sure. Of course, I talked about it in the other video, but they did get to the second round after beating the Mavericks in the first round. They lost to the Jazz in the second round, but at least they got that far. The big difference for this team was that during the middle of the season in January, they traded Troy Murphy and Mike Dunleavy Jr. to the Pacers in exchange for Steven Jackson and Al Harrington, who were both upgrades at their positions over the two guys that they traded away, which is pretty nice for the Warriors. So for this season, you had Baron Davis getting into better form. He was leading the team, averaging 20 points per game, shooting 44% from the field, averaging 8 assists as well. You had Monte Ellis, who won Most Improved Player this year. He was averaging about 17 points per game, shooting 48% from the field, 4 assists per game. Once Steven Jackson was acquired, he was averaging 17 points per game as well, shooting 45% from the field. Then you had Jason Richardson averaging 16 points per game, shooting 42% from the field, and Al Harrington scoring 17 points per game, shooting 46% from the field. And then, so Monte Ellis was sort of the sixth man along with Al Harrington some of the time. And, well, because they were acquired down the stretch, the starting lineup fluctuated a little bit with testing out lineups and stuff, but basically the starting lineup was Baron Davis, uh, Jason Richardson, Steven Jackson, Al Harrington, and Andre Biedrins. And then Monte Ellis is the sixth man, but he was starting before the trade with Steven Jackson. And then off the bench, you had Mikhail Petrus, Matt Barnes, and Kalina Azubuike. Petrus was averaging 11 points per game, Matt Barnes averaging 10, and Azubuike averaging 7. And then Andre Biedrins in the starting lineup was averaging 9 points and 9 rebounds a game. So as you can see, they had a lot of scoring options on this team. You had a lot of firepower, basically 5 guys who can take over a game on any given night between Baron Davis, Monte Ellis, Steven Jackson, Jason Richardson, and Al Harrington. Any of those guys could go and get it for you and be your leading scorer, give you 20 points in a given night. The playoffs, they did kind of struggle in the second round a bit, and overall their stats for the playoffs were Steven Jackson averaging 20 points per game on 38% shooting from the field. Baron Davis averaged 25 points per game and 7 assists, shooting 51% from the field, which is good. Jason Richardson scored 19 points per game, shooting 48% from the field. Matt Barnes scored 11 on 45% shooting. Andre Biedrins averaged 6 and 6. Mikhail Petrus averaged 6 points per game, so that was a little down. He only shot 35% from the field. Al Harrington only scored 10 points per game on 40% shooting from the field, and then Monte Ellis only scored 8 points per game on 39% shooting from the field. So you had a fall off of a lot of guys. Basically, Monte Ellis, Al Harrington, and Andre Biedrins all dropped off a lot in the second round, and that's really the reason that they didn't go very far. But this was still a talented team. They had good players, and people thought that they would get back to the playoffs the next year. And actually, they were a pretty decent team the next year. They won 48 games, and I think if I remember correctly, they were the 9 seed, and they were 1 game out of making the playoffs, but they just didn't get in. The major difference between this team and the team of the previous year was that Jason Richardson was traded for the draft rights to Brandon Wright, who is, I think, the 7th or 8th overall pick. A guy who didn't ever really amount to much, and he didn't even play much for the Warriors during this season because they had Al Harrington at power forward. But I think they were just trying to go more towards the youth movement, and Jason Richardson was kind of like in the 29 to 30-year-old range, and Brandon Wright was like 21. So they were trying to get a little bit younger. This season, Steven Jackson's scoring average went up 4 points from 16 or 17 up to 20. Baron Davis averaged 22 points per game. Monte Ellis went from 16 up to 20. Andre Biedrins averaged 11 and 10. Al Harrington averaged 14 points per game. Kalina Azubuike 9. Mikhail Petrus and Matt Barnes each 7. So basically, the Jason Richardson 16 points per game. 4 went to Steven Jackson, 4 went to Monte Ellis, 2 went to Baron Davis, that's 10, and then a few went to Biedrins and a few went to Azubuike. So that they were able to compensate for his scoring pretty well. They still had like 4 guys who could go and get it for you between Harrington, Ellis, Davis, and Jackson, but they were kind of missing I think Jason Richardson actually added something to this team that they were kind of missing. And although they were still a good team, I think if they would have kept Jason Richardson over Brandon Wright, they would have been better off. But he also was kind of like getting close to the end of a contract, I believe, and wanted a new deal, and they weren't really willing to give that to him. So they had to get rid of him. But they still had a pretty decent core here, and going into the next year, they were still looking to be good. And so this next season, 2008 to 2009, is when it really fell apart for them. So they really opened up the bench this year because they had a lot of injuries. Major notable changes were that they traded Al Harrington towards the beginning of the season, like a few games in, for Jamal Crawford, and then Baron Davis was a free agent and he went to the Clippers, and the Clippers free agent Corey Maggette signed with the Warriors. So essentially, you could say they traded Baron Davis for Corey Maggette almost. And so they still had those 4 good scorers, in that they had Steven Jackson, Monte Ellis, Jordan Crawford, and Corey Maggette. but it just wasn't the same because they had a lot of injuries to this team. So I'll just read some of them off. Steven Jackson missed 23 games. Jamal Crawford missed like 25. Monte Ellis missed. He only played in 25 games this season, so he missed 57 games. Corey Maggette missed 20 games. Andre Biedrins missed, or Corey Maggette missed 30 games. Andre Biedrins missed 20 games. So as you can see, just a lot of guys missing a lot of time. All of their major guys, all of those major four guys between Maggette, Crawford, Jackson, and Ellis all missed at least 20 games this season, and as much as 57 games for Ellis. But Steven Jackson was the team's leading scorer at 21 points per game, shooting 41% from the field. Jordan Crawford scored 20 a game on 41% from the field. Monte Ellis scored 19 a game on 45% from the field. Kalina Azubuike played a lot more because of all the injuries. He played 32 minutes a night, 46% from the field, and 14 points per game, so he actually played pretty well. Let's see here. Monte Ellis played 31 minutes a game, 46% from the field, and 19 points per game. So they still had the really high scoring offense. Andre Biedrins, 12 points and 11 rebounds per game. And then Anthony Morrow, 10 points per game. CJ Watson, 10 points per game. Ronny Turiaf scored 6 points and 5 rebounds per game. Marco Bellinelli scored 9 points per game. I'm just listing off all these guys because they all played pretty significant minutes. Finally, Brandon Wright started playing a bit. He scored 8 points per game and 4 rebounds. But I think just for this team, the injuries fell off, and then they really didn't have this synergy or chemistry anymore in that, like, they still had all these good scoring guys in that Crawford and Maggette are just as good as scorers as, like, Baron Davis and Al Harrington, but they just didn't have the chemistry really that they had been building up the past couple of seasons. And so if I had to look overall for this team, what I would say were like the things that made them fall apart is that so after 2006 to 2007, they still were a good team in the next year, 07 to 08, but I think trading away Jason Richardson for essentially nothing in that Brandon Wright really never amounted to much more than a 15 minutes a night backup power forward. So they basically traded Jason Richardson, which is 18, like somewhere between 16 to 20 points a night, averaging out to 18 points a night. They really traded that away for nothing. Then I'd say just a constant switching of guys between him leaving and then Baron Davis and Al Harrington leaving and replacing them with new guys who didn't really have much chemistry with the team. I'd say that became a problem. And then lastly, injuries in that in 2008 to 2009, they just had so many injuries they couldn't really compete anymore. But also in 2007 to 2008, that was actually a really good team. And then just the Western Conference was so heavily crowded. They were a 48 win team and they were the 9 seed in the West. That's like one of the best records ever to not get in the playoffs. They were nearly a 50 win team and they didn't get in the playoffs. They were 2 games out because the 8 seeded Nuggets had 50 wins. So it's just pretty stunning how stacked the West was back then. But again, I guess if we're going with 4 reasons, it's that they traded Jason Richardson for basically nothing. The West was super stacked, so they couldn't get into the playoffs during one of their best seasons. And then they lost a lot of their dudes, and they lost the chemistry in that Baron Davis and Al Harrington left. And then they had a ton of injuries in 2008 to 2009, which prevented them from making the playoffs. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.